Well, another disclaimer at the beginning of this video, because it could well be wet on race day in Melbourne. Hard to believe, with incredibly nice weather Friday, Saturday, hot track temperatures too, around the 40 degrees, but big forecast for rain on Sunday. Guess who'll be rubbing his hands with glee there? Max Verstappen, who qualified third in the Red Bull, beaten really by just more grip in the two McLarens, and very good job by both McLaren drivers. Good job by Max, of course, to be P3 in that Red Bull ahead of the Ferraris and the Mercedes. And guess who won't be so happy that it's going to be raining? And that is Lando Norris on the pole, just from his teammate Oscar Piastri. Lando would want nothing more than just a nice dry race, take the lead from the start, have no problem with his teammate going into turn one or turn two, or turn three for that matter, and then just win the race. But it's going to be more difficult, obviously, in the wet. He needs to make sure he's the guy with the clear view of the road in front. And he's got Oscar Piastri, the guy that caused him so much trouble at Monza in a similar situation. And look at the context now. Oscar's just re-signed for McLaren, very relaxed, very confident, earning big money now. Big star in Australia, lots of attention. First Australian potentially to win the Australian Grand Prix since Alan Jones did so in a Williams all those years ago. So it won't be easy for him if Zak Brown is saying to him on Saturday night, which I'm sure he is, look, we can't have a repeat of Monza, what nearly went wrong at the second chicane at Monza. We've got to make this a clean race for McLaren. If Lando leads off the line, you're going to have to let him go and sit there and wait and see what happens. Not an easy thing for Oscar Piastri. He could do that in most races. This is the Australian Grand Prix. He's a young Australian. Every Australian journalist, can you win this race, Oscar? Can you win this race? A different sort of pressure for him. So it'll be really interesting to see how he handles it, and indeed how Lando handles it, and indeed what happens off the line, particularly if it's wet. All bets are off, of course, because where the grip will be if it's wet is very much a question mark. I guess they'll be trying to find that out when they go out on the reconnaissance laps from the pit lane onto the grid. But it's going to be a toss of the coin in many ways. And Lando Norris, of course, in the best position, being on the pole, but pressure on him in a way, because it's absolutely critical that he develops that pole into a race lead on lap one and then pulls away. Anyway, that's for tomorrow. Let's have a look at what happened in qualifying. It was Max Verstappen. For a start, the Red Bull a lot better today, as predicted, with the track picking up grip. Red Bull very good at finding grip in the car. Mysteriously, how they do that, no idea. Cambers, toe in, whatever, lowering, raising, getting the balance a little bit better, whatever. They got it right, and Max very quick in FP3. And in qualifying, he was quickest for a while in Q3, easily sailed through into Q3. But then on the last lap, when both McLarens got it absolutely right, it was a matter of 3 or 4 tenths of a second. And that all happened in the last sector. And there's no real difference between, say, Sector 1 and Sector 3 in Melbourne. It's all about tight corners, all about breaking into tight corners and traction, turn in. And Max, it should be pointed out, was really, really quick in Sector 1 on his fastest lap in Melbourne. He was right up there with Lando, ahead of Oscar Piastri in what he was doing with the Red Bull through Sector 1. Sector 2, he was quickest of all. It all went away for him in Sector 3, and that can only be because the tyres started to go away. He was just putting so much energy through the tyres. McLaren using its tyres better than the Red Bull, and they still had lots of grip. Well, in the hands of Lando Norris, still had lots of grip in Sector 3, and that's where the big difference was between McLaren and Red Bull. And that won't, of course, be a factor if it's wet tomorrow. That's a completely different story. And what qualifying showed us, I think, from the Red Bull Max Verstappen perspective, is that he has a drivable car that should, in theory, be very good in the rain as well, and give Max the sort of tool that he needs to do what we know he can do in the wet. I'm not making this a Max Verstappen bias video by any means, but he was the nearest to McLaren, and I just wanted to highlight the difference between the grip level that McLaren have and Red Bull. There's another way of doing it, of course, and that is to show the speed trap. It's a bit misleading around Melbourne, speed trap, because the speed trap's just before the braking area into turn one after the start-finish line. Not the fastest part of the circuit, which is around the back, but they're kind of turning a little bit there. They call that intermediate 2. So it's not totally related to speed through the air, as, for example, it would be at Monza down the back straight out of the Ascari chicane. Anyway, let's have a look at the speed trap, which is after the start-finish line. They're in terminal velocity. They're in 8th gear. George Russell in the Mercedes 335. Maybe a toe involved there or not. If not, Mercedes really quick. But Antonelli, of course, not quick at all through there. This is in qualifying. But then look at the Red Bulls, 331, 330, Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen. And look where Lando Norris is, 326, and Oscar Piastri, 326. So that is just downforce. That's the amount of downforce McLaren carry and the drag that it induces compared with Red Bull. A rather strange one there are Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton 329, so yeah, less downforce than the McLarens, but more probably than Mercedes. But look at Charles Leclerc, obviously carrying quite a lot of wing today, 325 in the Ferrari, but he wasn't that quick in qualifying today. We'll get onto that in a second. It's all a bit strange, all of this, but I think the big factor there is how slow the McLarens are through the air in a straight line, which just is an indication of how much downforce they have. Now let's have a look at that brilliant lap by Lando Norris. I say brilliant because Lando was under pressure. In his first run in Q3, he ran wide coming out of turn 4, and that lap was deleted. It was no big deal. It was a 15.9, but of course that meant that he was P10 unless he did the job on the last lap. And he had to really find that balance between pushing hard enough to beat his teammate, Oscar Piastri, and equally making no more mistakes. And that's what he did absolutely beautifully. And he basically beat his teammate. I say beat, I mean, we're talking tiny fractions here. But I think he got ahead of his teammate the way he began his lap. In the last 3 or 4 corners going into the flying lap, he was anything between 7 and 3 kilometers an hour quicker at various points of that last section than his teammate Oscar Piastri, getting the tyres a little bit hotter, which meant that he just had a perfect setup going into sector 1. And that is where he found his advantage over Oscar Piastri. After that, he was kind of there or thereabouts with Oscar, but sector 1 was where he did it. And it wasn't through breaking into turn 1 with these tyres that were nicely up to temperature. Actually, he braked earlier than Oscar going through there, but he was really quick on exit and then got a very good run down to turn 3. There's that straight down to the tight right-hander. And that is where Lando Norris was absolutely superb today. Perfect in the way he applied the brakes, perfect in terms of his approach to the corner. Still wide, but very smooth and svelte in everything he did, the brakes, the throttle. And at one point when Oscar was braking 7th, about 200 kilometers an hour, Lando at exactly the same place was still in 8th. So he had that confidence, the tyres were perfect. And of course that then gave him a big advantage in the straight that followed. So that was Lando Norris at his best. On this occasion, it wasn't a corner where he could come out of the brakes and throttle and just let the car float. It was just perfect use, perfect judgment of high-speed braking. And yeah, we've never really talked about that with Lando, but of course he's very good in that area. And it's not just a question of how late he can brake, it's how he brakes. And you get and when you watch Oscar Piastri braking at high speed, you still get the feeling that he's braking a little bit more harshly than Lando. You can see the car moving a little bit. Well, with Lando, a little bit like Fernando Alonso at his peak, everything is just perfectly in harmony and lovely to watch. And just a great lap under pressure. To drive that pole lap under that sort of pressure, having had your first lap deleted, is, well, it just shows that he is capable of winning the World Championship this year. There's no doubt about that at all. Watching Lando, and I speak now of a guy that's been around quite a long time, watching Lando in harmony with the McLaren, and I guess this is nothing but coincidence, it's very reminiscent of the way James Hunt was with the McLaren back in '76. It was just like the team, everything around him was just perfect for him, and the car was perfect, and it looks that way. Just get the same feeling. Watching him today, I was thinking, yeah, it's James Hunt in the McLaren, just in his championship year. It looked really good. So Oscar Piastri had a real chance to get the pole today. As I say, you know, the Australian star, lots of focus on him, big opportunity, fabulous race car. Lando making that mistake on his first run. It's kind of surprising. I think that Oscar then didn't get the pole, and you could say that if he's going to go on to beat Lando Norris this year to the championship, if there's a championship to be won by McLaren, which it looks as if there is, then this was a moment when he should have come up and taken the pole there. And it was only, I think, he just didn't get the tyres warm enough going into the lap. That may be just a driver thing. It may be an engineer thing that told him to cool it a little bit going up, maybe because he's a bit harder on the tyres anyway. They wanted the tyres a little bit cooler at the beginning of the lap. And then it was just basically braking a little bit later than Lando, apart from turn 4, where Lando just had him completely. And of course, if you think about it, turn 4 is a really important corner at Melbourne, because there's a long straight leading into it and there's a long straight leading after it. And that's where Lando did it. It was multiplying how well he was in the middle of the corner with how well he braked the car into the corner, and then of course benefited from the acceleration run out of the corner. And it hurt Oscar in all three areas. So it looks today as if Lando has another thing that he does very well. And this comes under the heading of just being so smooth and so soft with his touch with the car. It is how well he brakes at high speed. Just brilliant to watch today. I've used that word twice now, but I can't think of another word. Dazzling maybe is a better word. And Oscar is just slightly harsher. And therein lies the difference. So it'll be fascinating tomorrow, I think, in the wet, to see how Oscar drives this race, because he has a chance. You know, if he sees himself, which I'm sure he does, as a really natural talent, then he'll be thinking, yeah, the wet's going to give me an opportunity now to beat Lando and see how we get on. And then there's Max behind him as well. So, you know, there we go. And just to reiterate, Max really, really good today. Got the absolute 100% from the Red Bull, and was, as I say, a Lando match. Slightly ahead of Lando, really, for the first two sectors, and then he just lost the tyres in the third sector. George Russell did a good job, scratched around P4 in the Mercedes. It's about where he should be, I think. You can, if you watch Lando versus George now, you can really see how different they are with their inputs. George has definitely got that sort of slightly Alonso-esque movement on the steering wheel, which Lando doesn't have, and that's George. You know, that's the way he drives. Just has to feel that, and he did a good job. Did a very good job. P4 in the Mercedes, so they're there. They're definitely in the running in a wet race tomorrow for a great result. The big surprise to me was how slow Ferrari were today, particularly Charles Leclerc. You can say, you know, Lewis on a learning curve. Bear in mind that in terms of qualifying overall, Charles Leclerc qualified 7th, Lewis 8th, and it was very close. And you could say, well, that's a pretty good result for Lewis. A bit disappointing for Charles, 7th and 8th. But look at this. This is Leclerc versus Hamilton in qualifying. Sector 1, Lewis's best from all three sessions. You've got to remember here, that doesn't reflect the lap time they did in Q3, finally in Q3. That's the best they did throughout qualifying. Lewis 26.1, Charles Leclerc 26.1. Very similar Sector 1. Sector 2, Lewis 17.0, Charles 17.0. Sector 3, Lewis 0.2 quicker. Then in the intermediate, which is the back straight, more terminal velocity, I think, than the speed trap, Lewis 4 kilometers an hour quicker than Charles Leclerc. And then in the speed trap, which is braking into turn 1, just before the braking area into turn 1, Charles a little bit quicker than Lewis. So what does all this mean? This means, I suppose it means it's very good news for Lewis Hamilton. He just didn't string it all together in one lap, because he was basically quicker than Charles Leclerc in all three sectors today. So what happened to Charles Leclerc? No explanation at the moment. Looks like the car is, I mean, you could look at the speed through the air at I2 on the back straight there, 325, and you can say, wow, his engines are probably gone off, or something's wrong, he's running too much wing or something. But then again, you look at the speed trap, and he's actually quicker than Lewis. So probably Charles Leclerc's a bit mystified by it. It looks to me like it was a day when Charles didn't feel as if he had the right tire temperatures and just didn't feel he had the right grip. But look at that. You know, that's it. For anyone wondering about how Lewis Hamilton's going at Ferrari, actually today he was quicker than Charles Leclerc, first time out in the Ferrari. Just didn't show in the lap time because he didn't do it all in one lap. But, you know, interesting, isn't it? So let's have a look at qualifying then, overall, just talk through it. So McLaren on the front row, really good job by Lando, as I say. Oscar Piastri just behind him. Max, excellent third. George Russell fourth. Yuki Tsunoda parlaying what he did yesterday into a great result for the team today in P5. Got a little bit of a toe, but that didn't really add up to too much. He was just very good everywhere. And just looking just a mature racing driver, even though he's an incredibly young, still ebullient Japanese driver. And just what a job he's doing with that team. And the team itself looking great. Alan Permain coming on strong. I feel a bit sorry for Jody Eggington, who the technical director, who's just been, I don't know if he's been replaced, moved sideways, or decided that he doesn't want the hassle of racing. He's moved into Red Bull technology now, away from that role in the team. But wow, what a job they've done over the winter, and what a great car they have now. Really, really good performance from Yuki Tsunoda. Alex Albon's 15.7, excellent as well in the Williams-Mercedes, looking really strong there. And Carlos Sainz 16.0, suddenly looking a little bit spiky alongside Alex Albon, who I've always said has this lovely soft touch, bit like Lando, different in other ways, but has that beautiful inputs, seamless inputs that he has. And in a good car, he's looking really good. I'm sure a lot of people say, oh, well, this is just Carlos Sainz pushing him on or whatever. But to me, he's always been that good. And it's just a sign that it is a very good car. And Carlos, looked very good yesterday. I think today he was just a bit spiky in everything he did. I don't know why. Maybe he was a bit overconfident. We've seen Carlos do that before. For sure, he'll be disappointed to be slower than Alex. But at the same time, it is a new team. So there's a lot for him to be looking forward to as we go on. Charles Leclerc and then Lewis in the weird Ferrari performance today. And look at that, 0.2 quicker by the end. Charles quicker than Lewis. And Lewis actually spun at the end of Q2 on scrubbed tyres, harmlessly, and did a sort of, slight burnout to get back in the track again. And in so doing, brought out the yellows, and anyone around obviously then suffered. And particularly Jack Doohan, who was doing a very good job in the second Alpine, had to back off. Yeah, that was an example of how Lewis has been a bit irascible in the car, not in his personality, all weekend, and not able to string together one lap. And he still doesn't look to be the Lewis of old in terms of getting into the corner early and all these inputs. Around the last sector, he looks quite good. Sector 1, though, he still looks pretty edgy. Pierre Gasly, great job. Again, I keep talking about how good Pierre Gasly is to get the Alpine Renault up there into Q3. Very, very good performance. And then a bit further down the grid, Isaac Hadjar in the other Racing Bulls 16.1. Didn't get through to Q3. We're starting to see too that he is quite long corners. I was wrong about that. I thought he was one of the guys that can get into the corner quite early and do quite an economic job. But he looks to be like a lot of these rookies now, who are just leaning on the car, very wide entries. And we saw a lot of that today. I mean, Oliver Berman on his first flying lap with the car rebuilt from yesterday in FP3 this morning, did one of these things, very wide approach, caught an edge on the left and went straight off, and car was beached and didn't get it back, and then the gearbox failed at the beginning of qualifying, probably as a result of that, or some foreign material in there, I would imagine, something like that. So it was just leaning on the car with very wide entries. We saw a lot of that going on. Carlos Sainz did that. Liam Lawson had a moment as a result of that, and so did Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli is a weird guy to watch because he definitely has a feel for short corners, and you can see moments at the back end of Sector 3 when he's looking pretty neat and compact. But his problem seems to be the fast corners and how vicious he is with the car. Confident, I guess you call it, but I call it vicious. Just vicious with the car. Change of direction at high speed. I mean, he's just flicking it from side to side in a way that a guy who has a feel for short corners normally would never do. I mean, if you look at the way Max drives through the fast sections at Melbourne, you can just see the car. It's not on a piece of string. It's not just perfect like that. You can see his positioning in the car, but everything is done with incredible touch. But with Antonelli, it's unbelievable how vicious his movements are on high speed, but they're not at slow speed. I've never seen that before with a driver. I just can't imagine. I mean, either he's getting conflicting information and advice on how to drive the car. On the one hand, George saying, yeah, throw the car here, throw the car there, the way George does. And then he's just letting him get on with it in the slow corners. Or they're saying, that's the way to drive the car. You got to really get on top of it and see it coming from the engineering side. I don't know what it is, but it's a really strange combination that Antonelli has of this looking on slow corners as if he really knows what he's doing, and then fast corners, it's whoa, stand back. Who else? Yeah, the other Haas, Esteban Ocon, was ridiculously slow. I don't know what their problem is. I mean, they had very good last year, so it's strange that they can't continue. Aston Martin looked a bit better than they did yesterday. Fernando Alonso just ahead of Lance Stroll, but it was close. Look at that, 16-2, 16-3. You don't want to see Fernando 2 or 3 tenths minimum ahead of Lance Stroll at this stage of his career. But Lance Stroll, you know, not looking too bad, I suppose, and he's not too bad in the wet either, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes in the wet tomorrow. And we'll be back again tomorrow, of course, with another vid to tell you how that goes. Looking forward to that. In the meantime, take care. See you soon.